Would you like to reach our film and TV review podcast audience? Do you have a product or service of interest to film and TV home consumers or followers of the entertainment industry? Have a film or show production to publicize? For affordable price plans for all budgets, get in touch and find out about our introductory advertising options. Reach our audience of film and TV viewers and visit our site contact page at filmandtvreview.com, or you can email us at business@filmandtvreview.com. Reach out today. Welcome to filmandtvreview.com. Catch the latest film, TV and streamed show reviews every week. The views and opinions expressed by the authors and those providing comments are theirs alone. They do not reflect the views, opinions or position of filmandtvreview.com or their respective parent companies or affiliates. Filmandtvreview.com makes no representations as to accuracy, completeness, correctness, suitability, or validity of any information in this program and is for entertainment purposes only. Episodes may contain adult humor and language. For full terms and conditions, see filmandtvreview.com.
Hi, hello there, and welcome to this film and TV review special. I'm actually joined by Stephen Summers, a writer-director of a very interesting and quite ambitious documentary, war movie, An American Battle in Cinema. Quite a challenging, huge topic, Stephen, honestly, but thank you for joining me. But
thank you
for the show. So I mean, how long had this project been gestating in your mind? Because it's quite a, it's not something you just say, wake up and say, let me just cover the American history and war, because it's huge. So what led up to this task?
Yeah, it's kind of a lot of my things come out of very personal places. All my work usually comes from a very personal place, and this comes from working in film for many years, but also I think going back to when I was a kid watching movies with my father, and watching war movies were sometimes on, usually on when he was flipping through the channels, and it became like a very important part of my childhood and kind of upbringing and how I saw the world. And I started, as I got older, I started to question them and started to look at them from different eyes and different perspectives with age, and also as a filmmaker. And at some point, I wanted to do something where I dove into a genre, and I was like, oh, well, this is a genre that I don't think has been tackled in a documentary form. So I decided to go at it at first from a kind of philosophical perspective of like, why do we want to represent violence and, watch it on screen or play video games or, things like that. And I started down that road and I did some interviews, but it kind of eventually grew into this kind of what I'd say traditional documentary, examining just the cinema perspective and just the American perspective. And that's only, let me say this now, it's only because it is so big. There is so many good international war films out there that I was just like, I'd love to talk about, but I couldn't. So the project, I started it probably about 3 years ago, and it just, took quite a bit of time of, finding the story, the through line through all the possible narratives of, the history of not only, the films themselves, but the wars themselves, and kind of how do you put all this together, and then what's important to me is also the multiple perspectives of voices you could have in this, right? So it was important for me to get the not only the film perspective, but like the historical and then the veteran experience and how that all kind of ties together.
Yes. I mean, you open up the question. I mean, it is in one of the chapters, but it is probably a question that runs through the entire series, and you answer it. Why do we make war films? Why do we keep watching them? What compels us? It's a central question, I think, in the episode 3. But what's kind of like general thoughts or kind of any universal truths that come up? Why do we make them? Why do we watch them over decade over decade?
The reason is it's not really about the violence of it all, which is kind of what people react to, or they may repel them. The one answer I found a lot of scholars saying, and even veterans saying, is it's the extreme of life, right? It is the absolute point in time where the body, the mind, a country, politics, everything is just pushed to the limit. And the breaking point is often right there at the edge. And that's always attract us. I mean, we're attracted to conflict, right? Not so much always in a political sense, but a narrative sense. And nothing makes better movies than war films because conflict is inherent in it. So, and I also think, they help us to deal with something so extreme, right? Something so crazy and violent as warfare. And then that's something that most of us have never experienced or will ever experience, hopefully, if we're lucky. So it's that opportunity to look into something or to see something that we may be curious about, morbidly curious in some ways, right? But yeah, it's just, there's a strange attraction to it. Why the question I ask now here in America is why do middle-aged women all love murder mysteries all of a sudden? There's just some strange attraction because it's outside our world. It's outside what we know of the everyday. And so we want to gravitate towards that.
You kind of do illustrate this. What comes out is that we do have a kind of a complex relationship, or certainly does. It seems is kind of illustrates the push-pull between cinema and figure events to hit a nation.
Yeah, I mean, the relationship between the two of historically the war, whatever war is happening, and then cinema itself is always changing. It's never a stable thing. And it's always reflecting, the people of the time, usually their opinion of the conflict in some way, whether they are making films about it, whether they're in the support, the propaganda point of view, or the anti-war point of view, or like during the Vietnam War, not making films at all about the conflict. So just that kind of repulsiveness to the idea of trying to put that on screen. So in that way, it reflects, not only what we see on the screen, but, how we feel about it in the general public. There's also that kind of strange parallel, to me, very interesting parallel between the technology of filmmaking and, the technology of warfare, which is very parallel also as far as like the camera, the automatic weapon and the camera kind of came about in the same time. We started to have, like during the Iraq and Afghanistan conflict, cell phone footage and drone footage. And then you also see that in cinema. You see things shot on iPhones now, and you see drones being used. So there's this kind of strange parallel between, these technologies and kind of how they represent warfare and how we kind of want to see warfare in that way. But as far as a political angle, it that really changes with time. It's never stable. It's never one thing. And that's why I think it's important to look at the whole history of it instead of just assuming what these films are, because it changes constantly.
Yes, you do actually kind of like and kind of wisely, because I was thinking, how you do tackle it, but you kind of the format of actually, obviously it's a chronological order, but then you take it in the era that's in. I mean, say World War One, it's like 1914, 1917. You've got films where that is a kind of like a message in pushing from an isolationist stance to actually call a call to arms or to join the great fight. You've got film like you listen to Hearts of the World, Joan the Woman. and it's almost like in some of these films a vilification of the given enemy. So it's kind of like it was interesting. It's a bit more of a transparent relationship between government and a push to inform from the masses. It's did that surprise you, or was it because as you say, you just take it in context of the era it is?
I mean, it's what's interesting to me, yeah, is is the interaction between maybe the government and the studios, right? So during World War One, you had this very they didn't really know, the government didn't know the power of film yet. They really weren't kind of aware of it. But it was the actual filmmakers and the studios themselves, the directors or producers that really pushed this agenda forward on their own, on their own want or need. So, and then towards World War II, it starts to get more intertwined, and then it kind of just drops off from there.
I think you cite also the illustration where sometimes what would focus on a particular airman or serviceman, their job, it would be so popular that you'd have huge amounts of people drafting for that one position when they needed actually people in other service sectors. But I mean, it was quite a powerful era in film.
But it's weird because we live in a time period now where we pray or we hope that the government is not influencing what we see on the screen. That's a whole nother debate you could get into. But yeah, I mean, it's important to see that entire history of how we got here. And how the government and how the filmmakers really wanted to use this medium to say whatever they wanted to say, whether it's pro-war or anti-war.
Yeah, you did kind of like, it does show in the documentary kind of like how it is. They come to understand that tool. It's the government, it's studios, it's also you're getting an audience for what an audience responds to, and I mean, there's always a time lapse between when they have to digest it and when it's not too soon, when an audience is ready for it. But it does demonstrate, or like you said, almost fantasy, which I see in films like more. Maybe I'll cite like maybe like Gone with the Wind, so like 1939. Well, 1939 was quite a big period in cinema going.
Yeah, it was what they call the golden year of cinema, supposedly, right?
It's kind of like an escapism, yeah. But even that kind of like, it always have this prism of whatever the genre it is. We always have this prism of past conflicts rather than the current one that they're in. I mean, it seemed like a common method or kind of like one.
I mean, I think it does two things. It allows filmmakers to look at the past, right, and kind of re-examine, maybe a conflict that, take the Civil War, the American Civil War. The opinion of that changes through time. So, every film that comes out kind of reconsiders that history, reconsiders, how we look back at that, and maybe, saying, well, how we thought about it 20, 30 years ago is not how we think about it now. So that's interesting. And a lot of filmmakers do that. But the other thing they do is, in some ways, they often reflect whatever the current conflict is by using the past as a lens. So, if they're making a Civil War film during the Vietnam War, there's going to be little flavors of that in there, right? And so it becomes this, filmmakers weren't the first to do this. That kind of like metaphor has been used in literature and other mediums, but the immediacy of film kind of allows us to kind of like, or not the immediacy, but the the sight and the sound of it all allows us to kind of like be in one place but think of the present at the same time. So
yeah, I mean, I'm out of kind of like World War, those World War One, more World War Two films. A lot of the language of the war genre kind of spawn out of that. I mean, we take it as cliche now, but it was like, it's maybe you have the event scroll at the beginning of, and then maybe you have the stirring speech. I mean, probably now, mainstays, but a lot of it kind of like translate through films into even now, or even like quite big events. It is interesting how that language of film, close-ups, wide shots, and all that seem to the birth of that language is hand in hand with cinema. W.D. Griffiths, those epic wide shots, but
Sure, sure.
close-ups, night shots, and all that. Quite interesting. So I mean, it's after that period that we kind of like, I'd say you go into the era of the post-war World War II 1950s. It's where they kind of start maybe re-examining more the trauma of it, the veteran story. It's
well, I mean, I think it's important to remember it's not the first time they examined trauma. I mean, coming out of World War I, there was a lot of films about trauma, right? I mean, there was, All Quiet on the Western Front was definitely a big one. Big Parade. There's others, and so the Great World War definitely left a scar. I mean, a little bit on America, but definitely Europe. That was the big one. And then we all forgot about that with World War II. It seemed like, we're like, we kind of paraded around and kind of pushed all of that memory of that PTSD away so we could go fight this new war. And then, after the soldiers come back in the 1950s, start to reconsider things. And also it's not only, looking back at World War II. I mean, I think there's still a lot of glory in that, looking back at that war. But, people's opinion about the U.S. government, of how we were going forward with the fight against communism in Korea and then Vietnam, it just didn't sit well with Americans. And, and so the movies just started to reflect that. They just, there started to become a distrust, that was never there during World War II. It started very slowly and just built and built and built for years. And the films definitely reflect that.
Would you like to reach our film and TV review podcast audience? Do you have a product or service of interest to film and TV home consumers or followers of the entertainment industry? Have a film or show production to publicize? For affordable price plans for all budgets, get in touch and find out about our introductory advertising options. Reach our audience of film and TV viewers and visit our site contact page at filmandtvreview.com, or you can email us at business@filmandtvreview.com. Reach out today.
It's during the 50s, you get a lot of World War II stories. So it's kind of like you get Dam Busters, From Here to Eternity, Paths of Glory. But it seemed an easy one. It's like, well, they call it the good war. It seemed a bit more clear cut who the bad guys were almost. It's kind of in cinematic level. So
it's like some scholars were like, it's the perfect story. You can't get worse than the Nazis almost, right? I mean, they were just, you couldn't write them better. So, and it was clear cut, pretty black and white for the most part. So and when I say we, I say the United States has constantly gone back to that war as like, hey, remember when everything was easy and clear cut and, great? So definitely in the 50s, but man, I mean, we're still doing it today. It's still like, we still go back to what WW2 is like, to remind ourselves, even, when stuff's going downhill for us, maybe a little bit here and there, as far as, on the conflict front, that we had this great moment. And so, it becomes a little bit of a fallback for movie makers and audiences too,
Yeah, it's certainly kind of like a go-to. It's going to be a sure win, a feel-good kind of like trope to go to. But so I mean, like you mentioned, it's there's this kind of a juxtaposition between where we get a bit more audiences that get more savvy. You've got the era of television, and I think there's this push to these great, epic, sweeping movies. I think you've got like Lawrence of Arabia, The Longest Day, The Guns of Navarone. I mean, this is 1960s, 1962 or so forth. Very much. Do you think it also made it a bit too glamorous, where it is more like a push to almost glamorized war in
I
that period?
I don't. I mean, some of those films differ quite a bit. You take like Longest Day, and it's a very, trumpets blaring. Here come the heroes to save the day. And they were doing new stuff in that film as far as showing multiple perspectives, which was something never really tackled before. But you have something like Lawrence of Arabia, which is about this, British character that is a little, he's a little unhinged and a little crazy. So, and that's about the First World War, but in the desert. So they're all kind of a little different. I think the big thing with those films was just, again, reflecting what's happening in the larger world is like the battle, not so much on the war front, but between cinema and television, right? Like they had to, the studios were like, we have to make things bigger and badder. And so they just made films that were giant and long. And, most of those films that you mentioned were not only massive, but they were also like in cooperation with, the British in a lot of them. There was a lot of joint studio work there. So it was kind of a unique time in that. As far as glorifying war, I don't know. They definitely all played the hero, part very loud. I would say that. Yeah, that definitely comes across, I mean, the Western was also big then. So, the idea of hero was just a big thing. So,
it is, let's say the decade after that, like you mentioned, it's audiences getting a bit more mistrustful or a bit more critical. Certainly during the like 70s, let's say the early 70s, it's this juxtaposition of anti-authoritarianism, mistrust, but then again, there's this feeling you're in a war. It's your fighting, it's your boys out there or girls, but you get films like The Dirty Dozen, MASH, Catch-22, all these. A lot of these are actually set in the Korean War. I mean, Altman's MASH is supposed to be.
It's
supposed
Korean
to be
War. Yeah,
it's obviously name only, but it's very much about Vietnam era. And
yeah. I mean, it's they don't look like people in the 50s in Korea at all. Yeah, it's just. I mean, it's supposed to be funny. It's supposed to just not line up correctly.
It's pretty much the anti-hero kind of like that takes center stage there, like Dirty Dozen.
Yeah. It's we still want that movie. We still want the war movie, but how can we do it in a way that the guys that don't want to go to the war, as you draft dodgers or what have you, or anti-war protesters may still be like, nah, all right, like this guy hates authority, or this guy, they're there because they don't want to be there. So, that becomes the anti-hero becomes the new kind of center stage for a lot of these films. And there's a lot of, they all have a push against, whether they take place in WW2 or Korea, they're pushing against the status quo of what the average soldier is supposed to be like there. So, there was an attraction there.
I mean, it's and also maybe, of course, come to the late 70s. I mean, be a miss not to mention, but you got this kind of like, certainly a spate of films that really then start to take a very close look to the Vietnam War, the post. I mean, the absurdity and maybe the heavy trauma of those coming home. I mean, I'm at Apocalypse Now, The Deer Hunter. I mean, these are kind of like those big social movies that were, quite that era of Hollywood cinema. 70s almost like a golden period of great social films. But I mean, that's where kind of like we start thinking, oh, this is a serious look and an ugly look at not shying away from the what it does to the human psyche and soldiers. So it's very much almost become an anti-war movie, well, a more war movie. But as you say, it's interesting part of cinema, honestly.
Yeah, because we came out, like I said earlier, during the Vietnam War film, there were no films about that. Well, there was one, I should say, that was made during that war, which has never happened before in, since cinema's been around. So it was kind of, and it was a long war too. It was on for many years. And the fact that we didn't have any films that really kind of tried to explore it said something about the culture of the time. And now, you have like 5 years afterwards, you have these directors like Coppola and Michael Cimino that kind of try to start to unpack it, maybe not successfully to some people, right? To veterans, they kind of saw some of those films as being inaccurate in ways, but it was the start of opening the dialogue about those conflicts.
I mean, it's we've got kind of a new wave of directors around that time. It's like it's the new Hollywood back then, and funny enough, but in quite, like I said, quite a lot of social commentary films, but again, like you mentioned before, there is a complete U-turn in cinemas in audiences rather, where they really want to just go the other way, because it's kind of almost, there's like the dawn of the modern blockbusters, the kind of fantasy vehicles, and you've got like Jaws 1975, and of course Star Wars, but ironically takes a lot of the tropes of a World War II movie. Quite honestly, it's quite fascinating.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's a bombing run in it, for God's sake. I mean, I mean, all those. There's no doubt about it that one influences the other for sure.
I mean, I think I did hear that like George Lucas used to, for those fights, those aerial scenes, did cut a lot of World War II sequences into it when he was actually trying to piece it together, and a lot of the sets and all that. Of course, it was filmed in the UK here, but a lot of the World War II scrapyards are actually sourced, and you'd recognize canopy, the kind of like pilots seating and so forth.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's great.
So it's of course we kind of like, then we hit the 80s. It's like another U-turn where it's 10 years after maybe Vietnam's ended it, and it's almost like we get this period of where cinema is trying to reclaim the Vietnam War again, where you've got kind of stuff like Rambo, Top Gun. I mean, these are kind of or any Chuck Norris kind of movie that come out.
It's weird because that's, I mean, that's kind of more of a conservative return to Vietnam, and in the idea, especially with, the first Rambo, First Blood, is kind of not a bad movie. It's about a guy suffering from PTSD. It's the second one where he goes back to Vietnam, which is an incredible metaphor, right? Of saying, like, as a country, like, we're not done. Let's go back and fix this thing. And it talks about POWs and, the idea of leaving something behind and trying to get back and reclaim it. So there's kind of like early 80s, I would call them kind of conservative or reappropriating the war to kind of fight against what was known as the Vietnam Syndrome, which is like this idea that, the United States has been, kind of castrated because of this war. And now we got to refind our glory. We got to refind who we are. And so what do? We send a dude over without a shirt on to just, tear shit up over there. So I mean, that's kind of stuff I grew up on too. And so like, I loved in this doc because it made me go back and look at that stuff and see it as like kind of where it comes from now. So, but and then the 80s evolved into like kind of what they call the third phase of Vietnam War movies, such as Platoon and Full Metal Jacket, and there were others, but they were more honest. They were really kind of like, let's explore the soldiers on the ground, their experience, and they were often done from veteran viewpoints too. Like they were either writing or directing, so you got a way more empathetic viewpoint of the war experience in those films.
I mean, it's just difficult to really kind of like get across unless you've maybe how fortunate, how close these films get, or just as it does it to them. But did you talk to anyone who thought this site of film, this is pretty much as close as I've seen on film, and maybe a bit of experience of how the war was, maybe on the ground or anything like that?
Yes and no. Because I mean, the one thing, was established by many people that they said this throughout the doc is that you can't ever replicate this experience. It's impossible, right? There's just being in a war zone. I've been told is just sensory overload, right? Just sound, sight, smell, vision, all that stuff. So to try to put that into a film and ever try to encapsulate that in a like true senses, we have to, as viewers, just go, that can never be achieved. But there are small things I've heard from veterans that, confusion is a big one that kind of comes up. If which they, I heard from veterans about Platoon is like just the sheer confusion of a firefight, right? Not this nice, organized, clear, we know who we're shooting at, right? Another thing that I didn't put in the film was this one veteran was talking about in Full Metal Jacket. There's a scene where they're running and there's the sound of their like backpacks, like just kind of jostling around. And he's like, yes, that is what I remember. That sound of like running and just all your gear kind of making that noise. Now that may not seem important to us, but that's like that's of the moment for them, right? It's not going to be their experience is not going to be like a movie. That's the other thing too, right? It's never going to be this kind of clear cut, perfectly framed experience. It's going to be very, it's going to be a lot of things.
I mean, as we kind of like move on to the modern era, it's where we say post 9/11, Afghanistan, all that. It seems a bit of a murky world and landscape to cinematically portray, as in because you kind of narratively always need someone to get behind and not. And what space do you think war movie could, even if there is a space for it in this much more murkier world, and where you've got so many perspectives and we've got so many viewpoints that hit us now in the age of online and all that? Do you think it's very difficult? Do you think don't see that many that we used to, but maybe that's reflection of the times. But do you think it's possible, or is it maybe it's like you always find a viewpoint to depict on cinema or on film?
I think, like storytellers evolve with the times. They evolve the storytelling method, or at least the delivery system, of, whether it be a 2-hour feature or an epic 3-hour or, a mini series or something like that. So personally, yeah, on one end, I'm hoping storytellers evolve and kind of embrace these, like the mini series more often, because that allows you to get more perspective, more voices in there. But it is difficult. It is very difficult because it's hard not to make these things today without seeming like, there's an agenda put forth, right? I think that's always, especially if you're talking about the Iraq and Afghanistan war, like I don't know if a good film about those wars has been made yet. There's a lot of great films that have come out, like American Sniper and Lone Survivor, but I don't think enough time has passed for us to process them yet. So, time is always a big factor in these things too, of like this kind of like giving the people, the viewers, the veterans time to process and say, how can we represent this? How can we represent this time in a way that, not only reflects our experience, but the experience of the, maybe the people, the general public, but speaking a language that is current too and speaks to different perspectives. So it takes time, I think.
Yes. Have you had any kind of like responses to? It's from Cantilever Films. It's the documentary series producer. Have you had any responses or gauging any audience reactions to who you've shown this to, or what strikes them the most about this series?
The biggest thing, I think, it's been pretty positive. I think the biggest thing is people love seeing the whole story. It's not the complete story, but it's the whole story. And I think that's important for people, especially people that like maybe like war films, but they don't kind of know much about the interaction of, the making of them, what happened around them, and things like that. So it kind of, my goal was to give people this kind of general kind of look at the history of this stuff and say, okay, it's been this thing, and then it changed into this, and it changed into that. What can we do with it now? How can we, we shouldn't put these stories away, or we shouldn't put the veteran experience away. How can we tell it in a new way? And I'm hoping, maybe that'll, birth some new ideas out of it. But yeah, I mean, people have been pretty positive about it. I haven't had any real pushback on it yet. So, I'm sure that I'll have somebody say, well, how come you didn't cover this film? Or, what about this? That'll come, but nothing too bad yet.
Yeah. Well, Stephen, it's been a pleasure. I think the film or the documentary, it's a 5-part series. So it's 5 hours, and you think, wow. I mean, you put it in a very digestible, but it's interesting from the history of cinema, but also, of course, the identity of a nation. But it's also global. I mean, it's very quick. You can see just how the relationship, a war is not. It's not in a vacuum, really, wherever you are. But it is pretty fascinating, even just as a historical document of this. But it's well done that, and kudos. So I would recommend it. Where can we actually see it? Is it got distribution anywhere, or where can it be released?
You can purchase the DVDs and Blu-rays now through the website, cantileverfilms.com. They should be up on Amazon within a month or so as far as buying those. But we're working on streaming. It should be streaming in a month or so. So I don't have a place yet, but it's in the process. So, those things move at a time we don't control. So we'll see,
So what's next? Have you got another project percolating?
I do.
In the works?
Yeah. We've started already. It's hard to stop. That's the thing. Once you think you want a break, but you can't. No, the next is kind of it's a documentary, but it's more of a little bit more experimental in that way. It's a feature about the fear of the apocalypse, and kind of like war films in the same kind of way of looking at the history of how we've seen this idea of the end of the world, kind of culturally, historically, and how that is relevant to us today, like with all the, the fears in the world. How do we navigate this fear? But we also need to understand that this fear has always been with us as human beings, right? So, not to push against or away from, global warming or any of the conflicts in the world. They're still real and they're still important, but this stuff's not new. It's been around for thousands of years, and just kind of like, how do we deal with it, right?
Well, I look forward to that, Stephen. I think, judging by this, it's be very interesting what you dig up and present to us.
Thanks.
Stephen, thank you for joining us, and
Sure.
We'll see you next time. Bye.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this film and TVreview.com episode. Catch the latest film and TV reviews, together with regular episode content from the world of film and TV every week. See you soon. Would you like to reach our film and TV review podcast audience? Do you have a product or service of interest to film and TV home consumers or followers of the entertainment industry? Have a film or show production to publicize? For affordable price plans for all budgets, get in touch and find out about our introductory advertising options. Reach our audience of film and TV viewers and visit our site contact page at filmandtvreview.com, or you can email us at business@filmandtvreview.com. Reach out today.